What's up, everyone? I'm Scott.
And I'm Jason.
And you are listening to Liquid Carnage. We are back. We apologize for last week. I was down with the sickness, and I had zero voice, energy, or inclination to do anything that did not involve leaving the couch.
And I was, and we might have been able to do something later in the week, but I was traveling, so
Nah,
I was not able to fit it into my schedule. So
could we have done that?
unfortunately,
I mean, let's be
we
real.
we
You're
could
you're
have.
you're you're in Austin. You're touring presidential libraries, going to international speedways, Ed Sheeran concerts.
Ed Sheeran
Uh,
concerts.
it is not a terrible vacation for you right now. So the last thing you need to be worried about is a show for our 10 listeners.
Okay, well let me just put this out there for those listeners who have little children that are part of the family. Um, get the energy pills going early because playing with him, I just got done playing for about an hour with the kid, and I am exhausted. I
Yeah.
am absolutely exhausted. And he's like, "Hey, let's go more." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
done. You killed Grand Dude. That's my nickname is Grand Dude. You killed me. You killed me."
No, I get it, man. Like even Janice's girls, like her youngest, when she goes, man, she's a million miles an hour for about an hour or two. But when she's done, you could just see it in her eyes. You know how like when sharks are swimming in there and they're just in that mode where there's nothing behind them, but they just keep moving.
Yes.
When her youngest is having a good time and she doesn't want to stop, that's what it looks like. You know, it's just she's moving, she's doing the things, but she doesn't recognize she's doing the things, and there's nothing behind the eyes. She's just doing them because if we stop, that means we have to go to bed or go home.
Oh gosh, I have to admit though something to you, Scott. Now, for those of you who know Scott and I and known us for a long time, we've always had the argument of which movie is better, Dance with Wolves or Avatar.
Not which is better than the same movie.
They're the same movie. Well, I got a big chuckle because I guess the second Avatar is coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and all I could think about is, oh, now we'll have to see which one's a better match to Dance with Wolves, Avatar, Avatar 2.
Well, it's still gonna be Avatar 1 because I can't imagine what Avatar 2 is gonna be, but I know I'm gonna get drugged to it. So,
So you have to wonder because the first Avatar came out, what,
11 years
10,
ago.
11 years ago, and they waited 11 years for the next Avatar
Well,
2.
James Cameron said it's because the technology he needed to shoot it did not exist in the past, however many years. So he had to invent it to make it happen.
Oh my God. He invented the technology.
He invented the
Wow.
technology. That
Wow.
that that is an ego trip and a half, if you ask me.
Didn't George Lucas do the same thing? He couldn't make 1, 2, and 3 because the technology was not available, so he made 4, 5, and 6 instead.
Sure, let's go with that.
I mean, that's the story I'm sticking with.
Let's go with that story. I'm sure that's exactly what he was thinking with that. No, being sick last week, I had a lot of time on the couch, and when you're home all day, and I was in and out of consciousness for a couple of days, but I managed to watch the latest Halloween movie, Halloween Ends, on the Peacock. And for those that don't know, it's the Michael Myers series. These last three movies are direct sequels to the original 1978 classic with Jamie Lee Curtis, and it takes place 40 years later. So the first one came out in 2018. Then the pandemic hit. So the second one that was supposed to come out in 2020 got pushed back to last year. And then finally, the third one came out this past week or 2 weeks ago. So I had a chance to watch that. And it was interesting to me because it's getting mixed reviews, like most horror movies.
Okay.
You realize with horror movies that you have your true horror enthusiasts that are originalists. This is the movie that's supposed to end it all. The big showdown between Michael Myers and Jamie Lee Curtis's character Laurie Strode, and the movie really wasn't like that. It was about a kid because this all takes place 4 years after the Halloween sequel last year, Halloween Kills. So this is 4 years later is when the movie picks up, and it's about a kid in his early 20s that has a massive accident, kind of falls on hard times, and comes across Michael Myers after a bad night out and almost becomes a mentee to the Michael Myers who's now a mentor and have to kill people.
Okay.
And he starts dating Laurie Strode's grandma or granddaughter, and the big finale at the end was kind of anticlimactic in a lot of people's eyes because they built the whole marketing plan around Michael Myers versus Laurie Strode, who's going to win, who's going to lose. And when you get to the end of a horror series, because they've said that this is the end, And when it comes to slasher movies, there's never an end, right? Like
Right.
they always make sure they find a way. This one seemed pretty final by the end of it. But a lot of people were upset because Michael Myers basically had a supporting role in this, not a starring role, as he should with the Halloween franchise. And I watched that the first time. That's kind of the same feeling I had after watching watching it for the first time. But then Janice got back this weekend, so she's now not feeling well. So we watched it on Saturday night, and I read an article before that kind of put things in perspective about this one, and it got me thinking about reboots. It's this was a story about how evil finds a way to live on. We're so used to, in this case, Michael Myers, the Shape, the boogeyman, being that central character where evil lives no matter what. Somehow evil passed on to this kid in the series, and it was more of a passing the torch movie in that sense. And people didn't like that, but after I read that article and I kind of understood it better, it kind of changed the perspective on the movie for me. And I have to admit, I think I liked it.
Oh,
It's like I think it was worthwhile, but it got me thinking about expectations and what you want with reboots, what you want with certain series, and you have to remember though, you're never going to please everybody. You're never going to have 100% satisfaction rate, except for maybe Top Gun Maverick. I think that might be the only movie I've ever seen or read about where people are like, you know what, I liked it. It was good. That's exactly what I needed.
obviously it was definitely good. I'm wondering though if part of it was because the story, the original story was basically just testosterone and killing Arabs, right? I think
Yeah,
that was, or Russians. That was
Russians.
like,
Yeah.
that's all it was to it, right? Whereas this one actually had a story that was coupled with tremendous action footage. So does that, is that needed to make the reboot better than the original?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because that's kind of where I was going with all this. Because you watched like they call it the Halloween H40 trilogy. With these last three, they're much gorier, much bloodier, kind of a better story, like across the board. Um, and I think though when nowadays when they tell stories that you don't have 90 minutes to tell a whole story. Sometimes you have two or three movies to tell an overarching story.
Okay.
And I think that plays better. I think that's just the way we tell stories today. When you watch miniseries on like Netflix or what have you, or just other shows, you don't have a certain 30 or 40 minute story every week. You have stories that last the whole season. You're just getting bits and pieces of it every week. And I think that's part of where these reboots today, that's where they're able to bring back older shows and tell new stories of them because of the long form storytelling.
Can I ask you a question? In
Yeah.
your opinion, what is the difference between a reboot and a sequel? Because I would have thought the Halloweens, like these Halloweens, are like sequels to the original, but you've called them reboots. So I'm wondering what the difference is. What's the distinction?
It depends on if they acknowledge the previous movies. So the original Halloween had, I think, 5 or 6 movies, maybe 7.
Okay.
Um, and they don't acknowledge, this series does not acknowledge part 2 through Halloween Resurrection, the Busta Rhymes movie from 20 years ago.
Okay. So because of that, even though it's the same storyline, because
Yeah,
it's not at a, like, it didn't it breaks away from those characters that were part of it, that
yeah,
becomes the reboot.
yeah. So this one became a soft reboot sequel because it only acknowledges the original Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis, and then it moves forward from there. Technically, it probably could have acknowledged Halloween 2 because that takes place right after with Jamie Lee Curtis in the hospital, but it only acknowledges the first one. But I saw someone actually took the time to make a diagram of, like, parts 4, 5, and 6 are their own trilogy series. Uh, Part 3 is its own anthology because it has nothing to do with Michael Myers, and then there's the other offshoots, um, like the 20-year later ones with Jamie Lee Curtis, where she's the principal in the school, and then the other one with Buster Rhymes.
Okay, so that's where I believe distinction. For
Yeah,
example, on the Indiana Jones movies, those are sequels,
those are all
correct?
sequels. Yes, yes.
Because they're all the same characters, all the same
Same
story.
universe.
Yeah.
I think if it takes place in the same universe, they're sequels. Oh, like Spider-Man's a perfect example. Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland. all reboots. They're all reboot. Or Andrew
The other
Garfield
two
and Tom
are,
Holland's
yeah,
reboots with Tobey Maguire.
because
So
they're telling the same story. They're just telling it with different actors.
yeah, and that's how like the comic book universes are getting away with it now, saying, well, this is a different dimension, a different Earth, a different whatever. So they're kind of explaining away that yeah, this stuff happened, wink, wink, but it's not part of the stories in the world we're telling right now. You know,
Right.
so it's interesting how they do it to me, how they do it these days. But it got me looking at like different shows because it seems like the past 10 years or so they've rebooted a lot of older shows, and some have been great and some have been trash.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even with movies. So and then you kind of start looking like even music's kind of that way too with reunions and whatnot. And it makes me wonder why we can't come up with our own original stories.
Yeah, like I will say this, there are a couple of reboots of TV shows where the newer version I enjoyed much, much better than the old version of the same show.
Which one? Give me an example, please.
Battlestar Galactica
Yes.
was by far and away a much better show, the newer version versus the older version. Now, part of me wonders if it was because they took the premise of Battlestar Galactica, but they the foundation, the whole plot line and storyline was much different.
Yeah, and I think I think
Than,
that's a good reboot though. It's because they can take the basic plot points and basic storylines, but redo it if they think they can make it more successful. And I think clearly in that case, BSG, the reboot was much more successful than the original.
oh yeah, I watched the entire series of the reboot versus maybe one or two episodes of the original. Where after that, I was kind of like,
Yeah,
if I never watch this again, I'm okay. Now, how much of that is because, like you said, we're adding something to the storyline that wasn't there before? The writing changed, the entire show. Like the only thing that was basically the same was the title and what they called the bad guys. Everything
yeah,
else was pretty much brand new.
yeah. I mean, they kept the characters the same too, but they kind of changed up traits and whatever else. I'm seeing that happen right now on AMC with a show called Interview with the Vampire. Um,
Oh, okay.
famous Anne Rice story novel. The movie with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt was made billions of dollars at the box office, and now they've made it into a series. And I'll be honest, I only made it through the first episode, and even that was like to me. Um,
Okay.
I remember I was a big fan of the book, big fan of the movie. I can't quite get into this, but I think it's because to me the story's been told, and it's a very succinct story. I mean, you take a very succinct story and you're trying to make it into a series. I think you take a lot of creative license with that, and maybe
Oh,
that's not the worst thing in the world, but to me, um, it was a good story. Like I don't understand what else you really have to do to make it better in your eyes or update it to a modern world, and that's really what this is. This is updating the story to a modern world, and like I don't think I like it, and maybe that's just because I'm getting older and I just prefer the versions I grew up with.
yeah. Well, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but um, one thing that I think is very cognizant in both movies and in television is that you have this huge audience of young people that just have don't know some of these older stories. I was talking to someone at work who was 30, and we were talking about Misery, the movie Misery.
Oh, Kathy
She
Bates.
had never heard of it.
Oh my God.
She'd never heard of the movie Misery. What's that? And it's like, oh my God, do you know who Stephen King is? No. I was so it's like you're trying to capture these great things from 50 years ago that some of these people don't even know anymore.
Well, and that's even by today's generation. There's a little movie that's on my top five movies of all time. You might have heard of it. It's called Point Break with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze.
Oh, the original, yes.
The original, the original.
Yes.
Fantastic movie. Just a great thriller crime cops and robbers movie.
Right.
They redid it about 10 years ago, and they
I
made
think
it
so,
more
yeah.
like extreme sports. I never saw it. I don't have to see it. Um, our buddy JP has it, and he thought it sucked. So, you know, but that's the version kids grow up on today, and it hurts me that there's so many amazing stories out there, and people try to make reboots that they think are better or more updated, and I just don't understand why. Is it the quest for more money? Did Mel Brooks have it right with Spaceballs?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, like I think about it, and I guarantee you, in the next 10 to 15 years, someone will come up with the crazy idea of trying to reboot the Fast and the Furious. You know that they'll do it because they'll say, "Oh my gosh, the cars now." Or we could do so many more things with the cars, and we can do so many more things with the new actors. Because Vin Diesel's pushing 60. I mean,
Yeah, but they kind of already did that. Like they kind of when they came out with, what was it, part 4, when they brought back Vin Diesel and Paul Walker, after they went to Tokyo, that was kind of a soft reboot. That was acknowledging that stuff happened in the past, and they're going to try to bring the series back. So that's another type of reboot they have, which is the soft reboot, which is same universe, same people. Maybe they just tell the story from a different perspective with new characters, and the older characters are supporting characters.
Okay.
So I think the Fast and the Furious has already been rebooted to an extent. They're just now trying to bring back everybody and their brother and add more wrestlers to the mix.
Well, and I mean, obviously, the executive producer and I think this way about Star Trek. Okay, Star Trek, each series is a separate series from the original. It's based, so those are reboots, not sequels. They're reboots. However, within those reboots, you can compare and say, okay, this one was the best and this one was the worst, and some piece of it got mixed up together. But those dialogues are fun too, because those are all different series within the same genre, but you can argue which one's better, which one's worse.
Are those reboots, or is that just telling different stories in an anthology of a giant universe?
Well, I don't
because I
don't know, because I mean I don't really keep up with the Star Treks that are coming out now. I just don't, other than the movies. I've kept up with the movies because they're 2 hours and then you can move on to something else, versus a series you're investing hour upon hour upon hour of time.
Well, I'm pretty sure that there's a Star Trek movie where the original cast met the Next Generation cast. So I think
it was called Generations. It was the first Star Trek of the new, the new Star Trek Next Generation, and it was basically 2 or 3 of the characters from the old coming into the 2 or 3 characters of the new.
Yeah, and I always thought those just acknowledging they were from the same universe, just different times and different eras. Because they admitted, Star Trek 4 admitted that time travel is possible, and they get the whales in San Francisco in 1984.
Yeah, right. I mean, no, exactly. Yeah, they, it's only leaves it to science fiction to be able to explain time traveling and through time. They can figure it out pretty quickly. And there's no really bad things that ever happen when they do that. So that's the other part that's fantastic.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong with all that? I get that.
But yeah, no, I don't know. I personally, I've always had a tough time justifying taking a fantastic movie in and of itself and trying to reboot it or trying to remake it to modernize it for today's generation.
Is there a movie that you worry, or a story that you worry that you think is a classic that they'll try to remodernize and just butcher?
I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. I know that there are some classic movies that I've truly enjoyed, that Oscar films that I've truly enjoyed, that I could totally foresee them trying to reboot it, just to update it to the new generation. Because even great movies, some kids don't like to watch even great movies that are just old to them.
Yeah,
like when you watch a classic movie, like for example, Misery. Mm-hmm. To this girl, that was made before she was born.
Yeah.
So the chances of her watching that movie, the chance of watching that movie for her are probably pretty slim, because you can't really call it a horror film, right? You can't really call it a horror film.
I'd call it a suspense film.
But a perfect example. If someone were to go back and try to remake Silence of the Lambs,
mm-hmm.
I don't know how they would not butcher that thing. I don't know how they would not butcher that thing. And so to me, that's the fear, is that, who knows Anthony Hopkins from that genre? Not very many people, right? Because most of the movies he did were prior to most of these people being born. So in 10 years, Jodie Foster's kind of the same way. She was a big name during our time, but she's not a big name actress now. So
Well,
when you say, "Oh my gosh, there's a great psychological thriller called Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster," they're going to look at the same way as, "Oh man, there's this great movie with Clark Gable and Gloria Gaynor, or not Gloria Gaynor, but Carol Lombard.
Gloria Gaynor.
Fantastic,
Wow.
fantastic
Didn't
movie."
survive.
Most of us are going to say, "Who the fuck are those people?"
But I guess that's what it comes down to. If you're going to do a reboot, you have to have a good story and have a good storyteller. Because if you're going to tell it, you have to tell it with an updated version. You can't go verbatim from the previous. But you have to keep like the plot points the same. But you can vary a little bit, And off the top of my head, the only like solid, good quality reboot I can think of over the last 10 years or so is probably the It movies.
Yeah, the It movie. We watched the newer one. We hadn't seen the old one since it first came out.
Yeah, see, you have to
But
remember the older one. That was also a made for TV movie. A lot of the Stephen King stuff, like The Stand, they redid The Stand on Paramount Plus into a 10-part series,
uh-huh.
and it was very good. So there are certain cases. I think Stephen King probably, with technology, in some cases, can be better with reboots between it and the Stand. I wouldn't want to see The Shining rebooted because, that's a classic.
And so okay, so here's another thing. The Shining could be rebooted because let's be honest, some of the red rum and some of the ghost scenes, now with the technical capabilities, they might turn that into something even more magical than what was originally done. That
See,
being
but
said, you
that being
can't
said,
change the greatness of that movie.
just because you can doesn't mean you should. Number
Yeah,
one.
right. Yeah.
Number two, I think there's something to be said about the performance of Jack Nicholson and Shelley Long and all that.
Right. Yeah. Like I think of the character of Anthony Hopkins, and from Silence of the Lambs, and I'm trying to think, okay, what actor would you have to get to replace his portrayal of Hannibal Lecter? Because
mhm.
not only the script, but also the actor itself. And if you don't get the right actor, that'll ruin it.
No, that's true. That's very true. And yeah, some of these roles were iconic because of the people that portrayed those famous roles, and to be able to step into that role is a big task for a lot of actors. And if you're not prepared, if you don't have the clout or even the acting range, you can take like a movie that was uh, a classic in the reboot and just completely just tank. And you see that happen a lot more often than people want to admit.
What are your thoughts about taking away from the greatness of something, like diminishing the greatness of something, being like not like a movie not being respected for its greatness in the time zone it was in, when someone just puts together something for commercial gains? Is there anything about that bothers you, like making something diminishing the
There's
great work that was before?
there's a lot of those. The last three diehards come to mind. Um, the first two were great. I mean, to me, they're classics, and the next three are just trash. But that's the quest for more money. That's what it is. You think you've got characters that can carry on a story, and maybe the characters can, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. You know.
Well, and I mean, now on the other side, like I look at the movie Frozen. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Frozen in and of itself was a great movie. They had to make another one. Why? Because the little kids grew up a little bit and they wanted to see another Frozen because it was so good. So maybe they also have to like remember that, hey, if I have an audience that wants this, I got to build it for them. Build
Yeah,
it and they shall come.
yeah, but it comes back to and I guess that's their way of creating brand loyalty in today's world because there are no original stories being told anymore. There's very few original movies out. I think Disney might do one every couple of years, but they're more focused on the sequels now because the sequels they known are known like financial generators, and that allows them to do the other things they like to do. Um, but to take a chance and create a new classic, it just doesn't happen like it used to. I'm trying to think of the last original movie I saw, and I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we've seen some movies that, were in and of themselves solos, but nothing where I'd say, "Oh my gosh, that was such a good movie." You know, that was tremendous. Like Top Gun, while I enjoyed the movie, was obviously the sequel. I mean, 30
Yeah.
years in the making, but it was a sequel nonetheless, and it was an amazing film, don't get me wrong, but there are certain films that I think it must be. How about this? It must be difficult for these people to mess with that. For example, Wall Street. The
No,
way that Wall Street ended, it was. I'm sure that the studio said, "Look, we could create something during because it came out right during the housing crisis." So they thought, "Man, we could take this iconic character and we could make something to kind of have a sequel, have it boom, bring in the young kids." And yet I'm sure part of them are saying, yeah, but do we want to ruin what in and of itself is a fantastic movie? Like we want to do that? Now they did the numbers and said, okay, if we make 40 million bucks, why not? So they did it. But I'm sure it's probably hard to justify that because that sequel was not great.
no, but I go back to I was watching a documentary on the making of Friday the 13th. I think it was on Netflix though, on how they made it movies.
Now
And
that's the one from the kids at the park, right? Or the camp,
the
right?
camp, yeah, Jason Voorhees,
Jason Voorhees, yeah,
the camp slasher.
yeah.
And the producer was very upfront saying, hey, back in the 80s when the first one came out, it came out opening weekend and it did better than we thought. And it did just well enough to pass our expectations. The Sunday night of that first weekend, the studio executive called me and said, all right, make another one. I want it out next summer. So we had to throw something together to make another one. And
Yeah.
the same thing happened for like the next 4 or 5 years because that's how fast those movies would have to come out. But they did just enough to be profitable. And they just started spitting them out. And that's where this whole thing kind of started coming from with these sequels. It's, you can, your formulas so you can make it work and you make enough money to go. So you can't stop it. It just kind of grows on its own.
Uh,
Never, never good,
yeah.
never bad, just kind of there.
Just kind of there. Now, let me ask you this as we get to wrap up the show. Is there any movie or series, group of movies that you are anticipating what the next, movie that's going to come out will be? Is there anything out there on your mind that you can think of off the top of your head where you say, okay, I get the feeling that this is going to be either interesting or this is going to be kind of scary or I don't know what to expect? Is
I
there,
tell you, the one series that terrifies me that they'll bring back on the reboot and they'll just do it terrible, and they've already made it into a TV show that was actually pretty decent. Was Lethal Weapon. I
oh, okay.
am nervous that they would try to reboot Lethal Weapon into a whole new era, and I don't know if it'd work in today's world, but that movie like that makes me nervous because the first four are to me are just I could watch them any day, anytime, and just sit down and get lost for hours because they can
Yeah.
just What about you?
Yeah. The one that I'm a little nervous about is what they're going to do with the James Bond series
Yeah,
because they've killed off the last James Bond, and now, so a continuation will not happen, right? Because of how they ended the last one. So not only are they going to be starting with the new James Bond or Jamela Bond, maybe it could be a female. They've talked about that too. Not only going to be a different James Bond, but it's going to be a totally different storyline, or it's going to be a reboot. And I'm like, oh man, Daniel Craig left such a high bar that it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that series.
I could have sworn I read where they just finally came out and said James Bond is more of a code name than anything else, so anybody can be James Bond, and he's kind of the
Oh,
distraction. So like
okay,
real
yeah,
spies can do the work. So I think they kind of covered that with the way this
okay.
last ended. Um, so I don't know, man. We'll see, but I tend to agree. You can only do so much, but
And
it's all
it'll
good.
be interesting to see if they go for the money,
Mm-hmm.
just put something action packed in there, or they actually go for I want to have it authentic. Because that's one thing I loved about Daniel Craig, the way they wrote those movies. I think they made it as authentic to the character James Bond from the books as any of the Bond characters.
Oh,
They really did a good job making it where he was a troubled person. A lot of it was just no gadgets or gimmickry, but they tried to get a lot of that out of it. So it's just him doing his own thing. So it'll be that's the one I wonder, worry about, see what's going to happen.
I think they tend to do a pretty good job of making sure they've got a good story and everything else kind of intertwined with it. So that's what I'm not really too worried about, because they've had to basically do this 4 or 5 times already, so they kind of have that down. But you're right. As we wrap up today's show, if there's a story that you just absolutely love the reboot, or you absolutely hated the reboot, whether it's in a movie or a TV show, we want to hear about it. Let us know. Hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, all at Liquid Carnage. If you have a new show on Netflix or Paramount or Peacock or HBO that you want our EP Tom to check out before the holidays hit him up at liquid_EP on the Instagram and the Twitter.
Yeah, we just finished watching The Midnight Club, and that's about as scary as I want to get, and that wasn't too bad. But
Yeah.
that was one of those series that it's like, oh man, ended with a cliffhanger, but ended kind of badly too. So I don't know where to go from there. So, anyways, that's enough said about that.
I'll tell you, the scariest thing I saw was the price of the Blink 182 reunion tour tickets, man. We used to see them all the time when I was in college. You know, 40, $50 a ticket. It was a great show. They want $300 a ticket now.
Oh, yeah. When we went to the Ed Sheeran concert in Austin, there was a woman who I guess is a big Ed Sheeran fan, and so she was buying tickets to Vegas and Pittsburgh. She went to those two shows. The tickets in Vegas were going for $350 a piece.
Oh, wow. Well, that just goes to show inflation. That being said,
exactly. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We're sorry about last week, but thanks for listening this week. That was Scott. I am Jason. And as always, if you never know quite what to say, just have yourself some liquid carnage.